Today we're going to talk about working with some data in Excel. I'm going to show you an example we used on one of our courses, and when you think about it's not just about knowing how to use pivot tables or knowing how to use Power Query. Sometimes it's about how you put those things together that makes a difference. So for this video we're going to use 3 Excel tools. We are going to use Power Query, we are going to use a pivot table, and we're going to use a pivot chart. So Power Query is going to do the heavy lifting. It's going to sort the data out, get it in a way that Excel likes it. The pivot table is going to put the data together, summarise it, calculate it, and then the chart is going to give us a graphical representation of the data. So let's jump in and we can see how this might work. So here's our data, and this is often where people go wrong, where they say to me, well, I can't get my pivot table to work. Well, when you give Excel data like this is actually pivoted data. So sorry about the red line, let's get a decent red line there. So let me just highlight the data. So this data has been typed out in a pivoted way. So in some ways, we've half done Excel's job for it. Let me show you how Excel likes its data to be. I'm going to put it in manually. It's going to take, obviously it gives you just a few examples. So if I was putting this data into Excel, as Excel would like it would have the word name, and then I'd have week, and then I would have hours. So for instance, we'd start off with Fred. In week 1, Fred did 21 hours. And then in Fred again, and in week 2, he did 38 hours. And already you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is taking me ages to input. If I've got to do this through everybody, I'd much rather use the example above. But this example here, this lower example, is what's known as tabular data. And this is how Excel likes it. Excel will be able to make a pivot table out of this. It will be able to group it together. So this top example is pivoted data. We've pivoted, not Excel. And the lower example is tabular data. Excel likes the lower example, we like the first example. That's where we have a problem. So what we need to do is we need to come up with a compromise where we can understand the data we're inputting, it's nice and easy, and Excel can make a pivot table. That's what I'm going to show you. So let's delete this manual input. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to do the whole thing. And let's look at what we're going to do. So we're going to go into Power Query and we're going to change this data from pivoted to tabular. So we're going to go click on the data. Please note my data is a table. So if I go to table design at the top, and I'm going to give it a name actually, just because I like to name things. The more you use Excel, the more you realise that naming, structuring is actually far more important than a lot of the other stuff. If you get that bit right, everything else will work. So we're going to call this table, I'm going to call it TBL time. It's the timesheet. So now I've got a reference, I've got a way of recognising that. So let's go in, we'll click on the table, we will go to the data tab, and I'm going to choose from table range. Now if you've never been here before, this is going to take you into, there's the from table range button, and there's the data tab. So this is a bit of a new dimension of Excel. So it might also, the first time you use it, or if you've got a slow computer, it might take a little bit of time to get into here. Just leave it, it will get there in the end. Okay, so what have we got here? We have got, this is a preview of our data, it's not the data itself. So if I was to click on there and type, it wouldn't work. It's just previewing. So it doesn't work Excel in the sense that you can't type in it. Now if we move over to the right hand side of the screen, you'll see on the right hand side here, this is where we name our query. And then here, this bit here, is it says applied steps. So as we do each task, or as we do each thing, it will list them down here. So you can go back, you can remove steps, you can edit them, etc. And we do a lot of that on our Introduction to Power Query course. So we can show you a little bit more. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name it. So I'm going to go over to the name box and I'm going to type in QRY because I like to prefix all my queries with QRY. When you get lots of queries, you'll begin to see why that's important. I'm going to call it QRY tabular. Okay, because it's tabular data. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on column 1 and you get a really big menu here and you'll see that there's so much you can do with this, but we're just going to stick with the unpivoting. So what we're going to do, we want the column, the first column to remain as it is, but I want the other columns to unpivot, which means I want them to be split up. So I'm going to choose other, unpivot, other columns. And there we go. So what it's done now is it's got the name, it's changed the weeks, and I've got the value. I'm just going to do a little bit with the headings. So I'm going to rename column 1 just by double clicking on column 1. I'm going to call that name. And the third column where it says value, I'm going to double click on value and I'm going to call that hours. So always name the column something that you understand. I'm not going to name the week column because I'm going to do something with that. So I don't want the word week in there. I actually want just the number of the week. So I'm going to right click on the column and we're going to do split column. Now if you use Excel a lot, there is an option, I think it's called text to columns, and this is very, very similar. So we're going to split by delimiter, which means there is something dividing the text that we can identify. And if you look at the words week and the number, it says week space 1. So it's that space that I want to divide the columns at. So let's go by delimiter. Again, if you've used the Excel text to columns tool, this is much better because you can either split at the leftmost, the rightmost, or each occurrence, so each space. So it gives you more choice. But you'll see at the top, it has picked up space automatically, which is good. If it wasn't the space, I could choose other delimiters. But I'm going to leave it as space. So I'm going to choose OK. So what it does, where it found a space, it splits them. And I've now got this column, attribute 1 it called it, and it's got lots of week, 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 week. I don't need those, I'm going to remove that column. So just go to the top, the column heading, right click, remove. And I'm going to rename that column, middle column, and I'm going to call that week. And there we go. So now my data's been tidied up. It's in a way that Excel likes it, and we're good to go. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to close and load. So the close and load button is in the top left hand corner, and there's so much more you can do with Power Query. If you're interested in an Introduction to Power Query course, do ask, because you'll never use sort and filter again. So yeah, or look on our website because we do run them. So let's do close and load. Okay, so what we have here, down the bottom we have a couple of new sheets. Sorry. There we go, it's named it the same as the query. My original data is down the bottom in the timesheet sheet. So that's my original data. So I can switch back to the original data. There's my query. I'm just going to move the query so it comes after the raw data. So it hasn't affected the raw data at all. That's still all exactly as I want it. So let's go back to the query, click on it. So we're now going to make a pivot table. So I'm going to click on my data. I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table. Let's put it on this worksheet. So the way this box works, if you've never used it before, the top bit is where the data is coming from. The lower part is where the data is going to. So we're going to choose Existing Worksheet, and then we just click in the cell. So I'm going to put this in E1, choose OK. And what we'll do next is we will arrange our pivot table. So this box here, and I'll show you, I'll just highlight it in red. It will come up on the right of your screen. And what I tell people to do, rather than ticking these boxes, is drag them. So for instance, I want week in the rows section. So what I would do, I grab the word week, and I would drag it along to the rows, and you'll see it pops up in my pivot table. I want the word hours, and I would drag that into my values section. If you tick them, Excel puts them where it wants to put them, and I don't want that. So you'll see now I've got a summary of each week and how many hours were undertaken in that week. Okay, so I'm going to close down or move across that. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to change these headings. On a pivot table, you always get these headings of row labels, sum of hours. What I suggest you do is just rename them just to make more sense. So we're going to call row labels week, sum of hours, I'm just going to call total hours. Okay, do rename things, because the more you rename it, make it easier to work with, the easier it is for people to understand your spreadsheets. Brilliant. So we've now got our pivot table. And finally, I'm going to do a graph based on that pivot table, because it'd be nice to see how the hours are increasing and decreasing. So make sure when you do the chart, first of all, click on your pivot table. And then what you do, you go up to the top to pivot table, analyze. My mouse has run off again. It has a habit of doing that. There we go. There's the pivot table, analyze. And in that menu, we want pivot chart. So let's click on pivot chart. And I'm going to go for a line chart and choose OK. And there we go. There's my line chart. It always puts a little bit too much in it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete the heading. I don't need that. And then where you've got these grey boxes like total and week, I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to right click, hide all filled buttons on chart, because really I don't need them. There's only one bit of information. And I'm also going to delete the legend. Again, I can click on that and I can delete it. So don't be afraid to tidy up your charts. What I might do down the bottom, I might put a label that axis. See that one there? I might just label that. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on the little plus next to the chart, and we're going to choose axes titles, and I can click down the bottom and I can type in week. So that one is just going to be clearer. And across the left hand side, I'm going to put in hours. Okay, so that just makes it much clearer. So I can see, I had a bit of a spike there in the hours. So we're starting to get this under control now, because we've got a chart here showing the hours, we've got a pivot table showing the hours, chart next to it showing the hours going up and down. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the timesheet, I'm going to add in another person, so that's adding myself, and I'm going to add in some hours. So I can just type these in as if somebody was entering the data, and that way it will just, nice and easy to enter. Now obviously I want to update my pivot chart. So what I can do, I can refresh, and this is one advantage of Power Query. So I'm going to go to the data menu, and I'm going to choose refresh all. Now often the refresh all button will refresh all the queries and everything else. So let's go refresh all. Okay. Occasionally, sometimes I find I need to press it twice, because what it will often do, the first time you press it, it'll update the queries, and then the second time you press it, it'll update the pivots. But you'd only need to press it twice for the whole spreadsheet. So can you see this is now updated? Let's try this again. So I'm going to add a week 16. So let's add in week 16. Okay, and I'm going to put in some figures for week 16. Okay, so these are my figures. And let's go back to our query. And I'm going to refresh all twice. There we go. And can you see week 16 has now been added on. There it is. And on my chart, you can see it now goes up to 16. So the data input is coming from this timesheet, which people understand. But then the Power Query is getting it into a way that Excel likes it. The pivot table is summarising it. And the chart is just making it visual. You could always have that query or the pivot table on a different sheet, so that you didn't have to look at those you didn't have to look at this first bit here. It is, but I'll leave that up to you. So hopefully that's been useful. You know, if you did want to know more about Power Query, speak to us, because there's so much you can do with it. It is, and so easy as well, because when you use Power Query, your raw data is still left alone. Unlike sort and filter and hiding columns, where your raw data's all over the place. So yes, speak to us if you want to know more. But I really hope you found this video useful.